Hi, welcome back to story time. We are reading, just as a recap, we're reading the Sisters Grimm, the Fairy Tale Detectives. And let's talk about what just happened. So we have two sisters, Daphne and Sabrina. Sabrina's the older one. She's kind of the cynic, which means that she is second guessing everything. Like, she doesn't actually think that anyone's telling the truth. And then you have Daphne, who's 7 years old. She is just loving everything, right? They went and their parents have disappeared. And there's this woman who claims to be her grandmother, right? They went to go live with her and they're checking out the house. Anyway, what just happened was they ran up to the room, and outside it looked like a bunch of fireflies. Now, I don't know if you know what a firefly looks like, but it's like a bug, like with the light. Anyway, so they decided they wanted to open the window to take a look. And then Mr. Canis, the weird guy, we don't really know, he's a butler, we don't really know what he is. He runs in and he yells, like, don't open the window. And that's where the chapter ended. So let's take a look at chapter 2. Mr. Canis stomped across the room, pushed the girls aside, and locked the window. The little lights outside flew around, bouncing off the glass several times, and buzzed as if in protest. A moment later, they were gone, and the whistling sounded faded away. Mr. Canis turned and stood over Sabrina. You are never to let anyone or anything inside this house, he said in a voice as low and scratchy as an angry dog's. It was just some lightning bugs, said Sabrina. Her face was hot and red with shock. Who was this man to think he could tell her what to do? No one comes in this house. Do you understand what I have just asked of you? Mr. Canis said. The girls nodded. Very well. Good night. He stalked out of the room, closing the door behind him. Sabrina stood dumbfounded, trying to comprehend what had just happened. So dumbfounded's like, what the heck? What just happened? What was that all about? Daphne whispered, but Sabrina said nothing. She didn't want her sister to hear the fear in her voice. Since her parents had run off, Sabrina had to be the tough one. Her little sister needed to know there was someone strong by her side, even if it meant Sabrina had to pretend sometimes. There was a knock on the door, and Mrs. Grimm entered the room. It's been a long day, hasn't it? Mr. Canis yelled at us, Daphne cried. I heard, the old woman said as she sat down on the bed. Please don't be too upset with Mr. Canis. He can be a little grouchy from time to time, but he has your best interests at your heart. Believe me, Lieblings, we are both very happy to have you here, but there are a few rules that you have to follow, she said, pausing as she looked into Sabrina's face. And I know what I might tell you not make a lot of sense, but the rules are in place for a reason. First, never let anyone or anything in this house without asking Mr. Canis or me if it is okay, she asked. Her tone was stern and serious, and no longer that of the sweet, loving old lady with the funky spaghetti. Mrs. Grimm took the girls hand in hand. Second, there is a room down the hall that is locked. It's locked for a reason, and I ask that you stay away from it for the time being. You might hear some unusual noises coming from inside, but just ignore them. Do you understand? She asked. The girls nodded. As for the rest of the house, feel free to explore. You'll notice there are plenty of books to keep you occupied. Really? Books? I didn't notice, Sabrina said sarcastically. If worse comes to worse, we can always dig out that old TV. Mrs. Grimm continued, as if Sabrina hadn't spoken. She got up from the bed and crossed to the door. She turned to smile at them one last time. Who wants pancakes in the morning? Daphne's face lit up. I do! Are you warm enough? Do you need anything to sleep in? The little girls opened one of the suitcases and pulled out 2 extra-large t-shirts that read, Bermuda is for lovers. No, we have these, she said. Very good, Mrs. Grimm said. Good night. Don't let the bed bugs bite. She's nice, said Daphne when the old lady was gone. Sabrina clenched her fists. It's all an act. That woman is hiding something, and we aren't sticking around to find out what it is. Get some sleep. We're running away. Tonight. Sabrina lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to her hungry belly grumble, and planning their getaway. With a little luck, she and Daphne could hide in a neighbor's garage for a couple of days, and then hitchhike back to New York City. After that, she didn't know. In the past, they had just gone back to the orphanage, but this time Miss Smirt might act on her threat to skin them alive. The next place she sent them would be 1,000,000 times worse. The girls were on their own now. We have to go, Sabrina whispered to her sister when she was sure the rest of the house was asleep. Daphne sat up, rubbed her eyes, but said nothing. Her heartbroken face said it all. Why is she acting like such a baby? Sabrina wondered. Running away wasn't exactly a new experience for the two of them. The sisters Grimm had pulled off several daring escapes from foster parents in the last year and a half. They had tied bed sheets together and climbed out of the Mercer's window one night, feeding their pit bull, Diablo, meatballs stuffed with cayenne pepper to keep him busy. And after the Johnsons had ordered pizza, the girls had slipped into the back seat of the delivery boy's car and were miles away before he even noticed. Mrs. Grimm was no different than any of the other lunatics they had run away from. Eventually, Daphne would understand. Lunatics is like crazy people. When they were dressed and packed, Sabrina slowly opened the door and looked out into the hallway. If it was empty, and as the two girls crept out, there were their tiny suitcases, she used her skills to the fullest. They tipped down the stairs, being careful to step close to the wall to avoid making them creak. At the bottom, Sabrina slowly opened the closet door to the latch wouldn't click, and the stack of books inside wouldn't fall over and wake the house. She snatched their coats, and the girls put them on, then walked to the front door. Sabrina was just thinking that this was the easiest escape they had ever made when she tried to turn the knob. The door was locked. When she looked closely, she noticed something unusual that she had not noticed before. "There's a keyhole on the inside, too," she said. They were locked in. "We have to find another way out." The girls crept through the house, doing their best to avoid knocking over any books. They tried all the windows, only to discover each had been nailed shut. They found a back door off the kitchen, but it too had a lock on the inside. "Let's just go back to bed," said Daphne. "We have to get her keys," said Sabrina. The little girl cocked an eyebrow. "How are we going to do that? She has them." "You'll see," Sabrina whispered. The sisters found their way back to the stairs, to Mrs. Grimm's room. The door was shut tight, but Sabrina was happy to find there were no locks on it. She slowly turned the knob and swung open. The old woman's room was scary at night. The tribal masks they had seen after dinner were even creepier in the dark, and the swords mounted on the wall flashed a ghostly light on their room. Mrs. Grimm was asleep in her bed, unaware of their presence, and snoring loudly. Daphne had the same annoying habit. "Where are they?" Daphne said, only to Sabrina's hand clamp over her mouth. "Keep quiet," Sabrina whispered. The old woman turned in bed, but stayed asleep. Sabrina scanned the room and spied the keys glinting in the moonlight on a table on the far side of the bed. She looked at Daphne, pointed to herself with her free hand, and then pointed to the keys. Daphne nodded, and Sabrina let go of her mouth. Sabrina took a small step forward to test the creaky floorboards. "This is going to be easy," she thought. But as her confidence was building, she noticed that Daphne had taken an interest in one of the masks on the wall. The little girl took it off its nail and held it against her face. "Don't do that," Sabrina whispered. "Why not?" "Put it back now." The little girl frowned and placed it back on its nail. "There, are you happy?" she whispered. A split second later, the mask fell off the wall, landed out with a loud clunk, and rolled toward the bed. Both girls dove to the floor as Mrs. Grimm sat up. "Who's there?" she asked. "Oh, it's you. What are you doing down there?" Sabrina was sure they had been caught, but the old woman leaned over, picked up the mask, and set it on the nightstand. "I'll have Mr. Kenneth give you a new nail tomorrow." She then fell back onto her pillow and within minutes was snoring as loudly as ever. "You did that on purpose," Sabrina seethed. "Whatever," Daphne whispered and rolled her eyes. Sabrina scowled. Was her little sister trying to sabotage their escape? So do you think Daphne wants to leave right now, or do you think just Sabrina does? I feel like Daphne does not want to leave. Sabrina crept around the bed to the table, picked up the keys, and then tiptoed back across the room and into the hallway with her sisters behind her. Downstairs, she quietly went to work on the front door lock. There were so many keys, and it took a long time to find the right one, but eventually she heard a loud thunk. The girls waited for several moments, sure that someone had heard, but when no sound came from the upstairs, they scurried outside. "Goodbye, dollhouse," Daphne said sadly as she ran her hand lovingly across the door. "We'll go through the woods. We don't want anyone to see us on the road and call the police," Sabrina said, grabbing her sister's hand and leading her around to the back of the house. The girls looked into the dark forest in front of them. Crooked limbs twisted and turned in painful directions. Sabrina had the sense that the trees were horrible, mutated guardians threatening anyone who stepped into their land. A cold wind whipped through the branches, bending some of the smaller trees over and making a breathy moan. Sabrina knew it was just an overactive imagination, but the woods seemed to be alive and reaching out for them. Behind them, the girls had a surprised yelp, and Elvis suddenly appeared. He trotted over and planted himself between the trees. His happy face was now serious. "Go away, Elvis," Sabrina commanded, but the dog refused. "See, he doesn't think we should go either," said Daphne as she wrapped her arms around the big dog and kissed him on the mouth. But Sabrina had made up her mind. She pulled her sister away and into the forest, with Elvis trotting after them. Inside the trees, everything was deadly still. There was no scurrying animals, rustling branches, or snapping twigs. Even the whistling breeze had faded away. It was as if someone had turned the volume down on the world. Suddenly, a high-pitched note filled the air. It seemed to come from deep inside the wood. "What was that?" Daphne said. Sabrina shrugged. "Probably the wind." Elvis whined loudly, but then he rushed to Sabrina and clamped his jaw on her coat sleeve, trying to yank her back toward the house. She pulled away. The girls hurried on with the dog close behind, barking warnings. "Just ignore him. He'll go back when he gets bored," Sabrina said to herself as something zipped past her eye. She turned to get a better look and saw it was a firefly, just like the ones that had been looking outside the window earlier that night. "Look, Daphne, here's the big menacing invader Mr. Skin and Bones was afraid would get into the house," Sabrina laughed. The little bug fluttered around her head and then circled her body. "Pretty," Daphne said, only to find that her own little bug floating nearby. "I've got one too." Elvis let out a very low growl. "What's the matter, buddy?" Daphne said as she scratched the dog's ears. This did nothing to soothe Elvis. The Great Dane howled menacingly and lunged at the lights with snapping teeth. "Hush up," Sabrina ordered, but the dog wouldn't stop. He was going to wake up Mrs. Grimm and Mr. Candace if he didn't calm down. "Sabrina," Daphne said. The nervousness in the little girl's voice pulled Sabrina's attention away from the dog. Daphne had had her hand over her nose, but what startled Sabrina was the fear in the little girl's eyes. She had had the same look the morning after her parents disappeared, when they had woken up their parents' bed alone. "What's wrong?" Sabrina asked. "It just bit me," Daphne said as she removed her hand from her nose. It was covered in blood. Sabrina was shocked. Lightning bugs didn't bite, at least no lightning bugs that she had ever heard about, and at that moment she felt a string that brought blood to the top of her hand. "Ouch!" Daphne cried out. "I got bit again!" Blood trickled down her earlobe. Sabrina rushed over and wiped her sister's ears with her sleeve. The 2 bugs became 10, and then 100, and then a swarm that circled the girls. Thousands of angry little lights zipping back and forth, diving at their heads and arms, and lighting up the ugly trees around them. Elvis growled at the bugs, but that was all he could do. "Cover your face with your hands and run!" Sabrina shouted. The 2 girls ran as fast as they could, but Elvis at their heels. Sabrina looked back, hoping the bugs weren't falling, only to see the swarm close behind and gaining. In seconds, they were stinging the girls again. Daphne cried out and tripped over the tree root. She curled into a ball and tried to hide any exposed skin. Elvis leaped on top of the little girl, doing his best to cover her as the bugs dived, stinging her uncovered hands and legs. Sabrina had to do something. Elvis couldn't protect Daphne. She waved her hands and screamed at the bugs, and they instantly darted in her direction. She turned to run, but before she could even take a step, she slammed into something and fell to the ground. It was Mrs. Grimm. "It's okay, Liebling," she said. "We have to run, Mrs. Grimm," Sabrina cried, but the old woman stood calmly as if she was daring the bugs to come closer. When the swarm was nearly on top of them, the old woman raised her hand to her mouth and blew a soft blue dust into the air. Many of the bugs froze in mid-flight, falling to the ground like snowflakes. The blue mist took out half of their numbers. The rest regrouped and began to circle the woman again. "I have a whole house full of this stuff," Mrs. Grimm shouted. Incredibly, the bugs seemed to weigh their options, and in one mass they darted deep into the wood and disappeared. "That wasn't very nice," Mrs. Grimm shouted into the forest. She turned back to Sabrina and extended her hands. "I'll need your help getting Daphne to the house." Sabrina was sure the old woman would be furious with them. There was no telling if her craziness would extend to violence. Who could tell what a woman who had swords hanging on her bed was capable of? But Mrs. Grimm didn't seem angry at all. In fact, she looked genuinely concerned. She asked Sabrina to undress her sister while the old woman rushed into the bathroom and returned with a bottle of calamine lotion and some cotton balls. She applied the lotion to Daphne's stings and tucked the little girl into bed. She'll be fine in the morning, maybe itchy but fine. Grimm stood as she handed the calamine lotion to Sabrina. Pixies are harmless unless you're overwhelmed by them. Did you just say pixies? Sabrina asked, and unsure if the old woman was joking. Mrs. Grimm wrapped her arms around her and gave her a big hug. Liebling, it's okay. You can stop crying. Sabrina wiped her face and felt the tears on her hand. She didn't know that she was crying. In the morning, Sabrina was as hungry as she ever had been, but as she was still not going to eat, she'd already looked like a crybaby in front of the old lady. She wasn't about to give up any more ground. By the time the girls heard Mrs. Grimm calling them for breakfast, Sabrina had spent 20 minutes trying to explain her philosophy to her sister. You can stay up here if you want, but I'm starving, said Daphne. The idea of skipping a meal was beyond the little girl's imagination. We're not eating that woman's food, Sabrina said, her stomach growling. We can't let her think she's breaking us down. We have to stay strong. I have an idea, Daphne said. Why don't we have breakfast, eat her cookies, play with Elvis, and enjoy the bed? She'll think she's won us over, and then one day, when she least expects it, we'll be gone. Sabrina thought about her sister's plan. She had to admit it was pretty good. She just wished Daphne hadn't sounded so sarcastic when she said it. The girls got dressed and walked tentatively to the hallway. As they approached the stairs, Sabrina heard something coming from the locked room across from Mrs. Grimm's. It sounded like a voice, but she couldn't be sure. She put her head to the door and the noise stopped. Did you hear something in there? Sabrina asked her sister. It was my belly. It's screaming for breakfast. Much to Sabrina's relief, creepy Mr. Candace was nowhere to be seen. After several moments, Mrs. Grimm came out of the kitchen with a big plate of pancakes. I hope everyone likes flapjacks, she sang. Yum, Daphne cheered as the old woman stacked 3 on her plate. Sabrina hadn't had pancakes since her parents disappeared. Her empty belly was telling her to seriously consider Daphne's plan. Hold on, Liebling, I forgot the syrup, Mrs. Grimm said, rushing back into the kitchen. As soon as she was gone, Daphne looked underneath the pancakes as if she were expecting a buried surprise. They're just pancakes, she said. You sound disappointed, Mrs. Grimm said, laughing as she returned with a large gravy boat. Well, after last night's spaghetti, I thought maybe you cooked like that all the time, Daphne said wistfully. Oh, Liebling, I do! The woman tilted the gravy boat over Daphne's pancakes and a sticky, bright pink liquid bubbled out. To Sabrina, it looked like gelatin. That's like Jell-O or something. It hadn't had time to set. When Daphne saw it, her eyes were wide. What's that? She cried. Try it, Mrs. Grimm said with a grin. Naturally, Daphne dug in and started to eat. It's delicious. It's a special recipe. It has marigold in it. Mrs. Grimm proudly poured it onto Sabrina's pancake after the girl had a chance to refuse. Sabrina looked down at the funky, fizzing sauce. It smelled faintly of peanut butter and mothballs, and Sabrina's stomach did a flip-flop in protest. She dropped her fork and pushed her plate away. Suddenly, there was a pounding from upstairs. So perhaps we better discuss last night's excitement, said Mrs. Grimm as she sat down at the table and tucked a napkin in. It wasn't my idea, Daphne said. Sabrina scowled at the betrayal. Well, no harm was done, no broken bones or anything, the old woman said. Granny, you have some mean bugs in your yard, Daphne said as she poured more of the syrup on her breakfast. I know, Liebling, they sure are mean. What is that hammering? Asked Sabrina. Mr. Candace is nailing your window shut, Mrs. Grimm said as she took a bite of her breakfast. What? The girls said in shocked unison. I can't take any chances that something could get in the house and someone might try to get out, the old woman replied over the loud banging. So we're prisoners, said Sabrina. Oh, you're just like your Opa, Mrs. Grimm laughed. What a flair of the dramatic. Let's put it behind us. Today is a new day with a new adventure. This morning I received a call. There's been an incident that requires our attention. How exciting. You two haven't ever been a full day yet, and we're in the thick of it. In the thick of what? Daphne asked as she placed a fat pat of green butter on her second stack of pancakes. You'll see. The old woman got up from her chair, went into the living room, and came back with several shopping bags. She placed them next to the table. Mr. Canis went to the store to buy you some clothing. Just a couple of things to tie you over until we can go shopping. Sabrina looked in the bag. Inside were some of the strangest clothes she had ever seen. There were 2 pairs of bright blue pants that had little hearts and balloons sewn on them. There were 2 identical sweatshirts that were just as awful as the pants, with bright orange monkeys and a tree on the front. Underneath the monkey printed the words, "Hang in there. You expect us to wear these?" Sabrina moaned. "Oh, I love them," Daphne said, pulling the orange monkey sweatshirt out and hugging it like a new doll. After breakfast, the girls got dressed and looked at their new outfits in the bedroom mirror. Daphne, of course, thought her crazy outfit was the best she had ever had and strutted around like a giddy fashion model. Sabrina, on the other hand, was sure Mr. Canis was trying to punish them for attempting to run away. "Hurry, girls, we have to get going," Granny called. "I feel like a movie star," Daphne said as the girls hurried downstairs. "You look like a mental patient," Sabrina remarked. Okay, I wonder what are pixies? When I think of pixies, I think of Tinkerbell and pixie dust. So what on earth is happening? I guess we're just gonna have to wait and find out. So that was chapter 2, part 1. We'll catch us next week when we read part 2. Bye.